Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And Bophana Center is honored to celebrate a series of lecture in order to celebrate the 60th anniversary of Cambodia independence from 1953 to now 2013. And in this opportunity, we make a series of lectures starting from yesterday. But yesterday there was inconvenient because the speaker was seriously sick, and so I apologize for the inconvenience yesterday. And thank you so much that today Dr. Jean-Michel Filippi is happy to share, not sick, happy to share everything with you. And I hope that the lecture will help Cambodian people or you guys foreigners understand more about how our Cambodian was like under the perspective of Dr. Jean-Michel Filippi. And thank you very much. Please enjoy the lecture.
I'm sorry, I love speaking with my hands, but I won't be able to do that. Well, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This gentleman was talking about my point of view, okay? I have to say something first. As you are comfortably seated and with no will to run away from this room, I am not a historian. I am not a historian, I'm a linguist. Okay? I'm a linguist. More than that, I've got some special opinions about Norodom Sihanouk. Norodom Sihanouk, an unusual reign. Okay? I'm not going to analyze in these 3 or 4 next hours, it will depend on your patience, all the life of Norodom Sihanouk and all the little details, not at all. I'm just going to, try to propose my personal point of view about Sihanouk, what did he do, achievement and things like that, and to try to define a kind of logic. Because the personality of Sihanouk has been and is still highly controversial. Okay? How could we approach a personality, a man, who was crowned in 1941, who abdicated in 1955, who was overthrown by a coup d'etat on March 18th, 1970, who came back to the powers a few years later to be kept by the Khmer Rouge in Phnom Penh as a prisoner till 1979, who was going to be the head of an exiled government in the next years, to finally be recrowned after having been a major actor in what we know as the Paris Agreement in 1991, was going to be recrowned again in 1993, and finally in 2004, he was to be retired. It's not an ordinary life. It's not an ordinary life. On the other side, I will try to analyze and propose my own analysis of Norodom Sihanouk. By the way, Norodom Sihanouk talked a lot about himself. He talked a lot about himself. You know that he was a movie maker. He shot more than 19 movies. And Norodom Sihanouk explained a lot about himself in the movie. For instance, in one of his movies, An Ambition Reduced to Ashes, tells us the story of a young man who is in fact a prince, who is going to reign one day or the other. The man is not really a man, he's half a man, half a god. And being half a god is invisible to common mortal people. Only through love a young peasant girl can see it. She can see it through her love, and of course our prince, god-man prince, is tempted, and finally, but he, according to his gurus, the guru who has been taking care of him, he has no right to have intercourse with human being. Else his real age would be revealed and he will be reduced to ashes. You can imagine the debate in his personality. I'm going to choose a power, am I going to choose a beautiful little girl? Well, Sihanouk did what I would have done myself. He chose the beautiful little girl, and what finally happened, I'm sorry, when it comes to technical device, I'm a total illiterate. Every time it works, I'm ready to see a miracle. You can imagine how many miracles I can see. And that's the last night, okay? The young prince and the little girl, the ambition reduced to ashes. The final scene, I cut the sound so you won't hear the beautiful rooster singing right here, okay? He's dead. He's dead, okay? His body is going slowly to be reduced to ashes, and little by little, his real age is going to be revealed. Okay? So, in this movie, Sihanouk shot in 1995, he revealed a lot of his personal approach to life. Okay? It's certainly one of the most revealing movies, but even in the others, okay, Sihanouk, in fact, in these movies, always talks about himself, what he could have done, what he didn't do, and so on. But, well, when we look at a photograph like that, Sihanouk as a child, okay, apart from the fact that he was a prince, there is nothing in Sihanouk which would have predestinated him to become the king. Maybe according to Mrs. Decoux was Admiral Decoux' wife, and in 1941, Admiral Decoux was the general governor of Indochina. Norodom Sihanouk was chosen because he was a very cute boy. Mrs. Decoux had the strange idea to write down everything she had in her head in her diary. The fact is that when the diary was published, at least a part of it, there were a few scandals. Norodom Sihanouk was chosen. You can see him here at the funeral of King Monivong, who died, we'll talk about that again, who died in 1941. Norodom Sihanouk was chosen amongst a number of impressive personalities, such as Prince Moniret, for instance, who was his uncle, and a few others who had equal chances to be chosen as a king. We have to know one thing. The king in Cambodia is not exactly a hereditary monarchy. Okay? It means that the king is not compulsorily the son or the daughter of the preceding king or queen. No, the king is going to be elected by the Royal Council of the Crown. Okay? So the Royal Council of the Crown is going to select one prince in the Norodom family or in the Sisawat family and to elect him as a king. Now, the fact is that the Royal Council of the Crown was, may I say, still is, a mere puppet in the hands of the real political power. And in 1941, the real political power was the French Protectorate authority. So the question, why did the Royal Council of the Crown choose Norodom Sihanouk, would well amount to ask, why did the French want Sihanouk to become the king? Now, apart from the fact that Mrs. Decoux thought that he was a cute little boy. You can see him here in 43 with the highest protectorate authorities, and the day he was crowned, he ascended the throne in 1941. Well, Sihanouk was seen by most of high-ranking French protectorate administrator as someone who really loved women. He loved women very, very much. So do I, but I'm not a king, okay? Sihanouk loved horses as well, sports, dancing, fine food, camembert, foie gras, champagne, dancing, writing music, writing songs, and so on. He loved beautiful cars. When the French wanted to sell something, they offered him first a Léon Bollé in 1927. Sihanouk loved particularly this car. And looking at the car, Sihanouk, well, is supposed to have signed every decree the French wanted him to sign. Sihanouk just didn't like politics. At least he was smart enough to persuade the French that he was not interested at all into politics. And they believed him, okay? They chose him for that, okay? You have another picture which was taken not very long after the one I have shown. You see someone already much more confident and much more determined. What was going to happen in 1941? 1941 is a terrible year for France in Indochina. First, there is the French defeat against Germany, the May-June 1940 defeat. The Vichy regime, the biggest part of France being occupied, and in Indochina, where the Thai used that opportunity to attack France in the Ko Chang Islands. Well, although they describe it as a Thai victory, I think it is the only French victory, military victory in the Second World War, as most of the Thai fleet was destroyed by a French cruiser. In spite of that, on the ground, the Thai could have substantial advantage. What happened in that Japan, in order to benefit from a very selective Thai-Siam neutrality, the Siam pushed Cambodia to abandon the territory that were given back to Cambodia by the March 1907 treaty, where you remember that in March 1907, all these regions of Cambodia, such as Battambang, Siem Reap, Sere Sao Phoan, that had been taken by Thailand 1.5 centuries before, were given back in exchange of a part of the Isan, which is now the eastern part of Thailand. So what happened at that time was that these provinces were part of Cambodia again. The Japanese in 1941 gave back these provinces to Thailand, to Siam. The fact is that you had the border which between the two countries, which was only a few kilometers from the temple of Ban Tie Srei. That was a terrible year. Precisely at that time, after I would say a few fightings in northern Vietnam in Lang Son and Cao Bang, the Japanese troops could enter inside Cambodia, as well officially Cambodia and the Vichy regime were supposed to be allied. You can see here, ce serait fou ceux qui pensent à la résistance des Japonais. One should be foolish, to think about resisting, the Japanese troops. Exactly what is said here. It is precisely in this context that the true Sihanouk is going to be revealed. One essential fact is the Umbrella Revolt, which took place in July 20th, 1942. The Umbrella Revolt is thus called because laymen and monks as well took part in the revolt. But we don't know exactly the origins of the Umbrella Revolt. We know simply one thing. As the French had ordered to arrest the monk Haim Chiu, and at the time Georges Gautier was the superior resident here, France was a protectorate, Georges Gautier had the idea of replacing the Khmer alphabet with, I would say, Latinized letter, a Latinized system. Well, it was not, contrary to what has been said, to be implemented immediately, but first the administration literature, the text, should have been written by using a Roman system. And then little by little, the whole Khmer language, the example which was given at that time was, well, it could work with Vietnamese, so it can work with Khmer, was to be written with a Latin alphabet. You can imagine that was not very well appreciated by the monks and by the intellectual elite. Mainly by one very important part of that Cambodian intellectual elite, people working around the newspaper Nagaravata, people like Songok Tan and a few others as well. That was one point. And the second thing, people working in the Buddhist Institute. This was precisely what they couldn't meet. So how did the Umbrella Revolt begin? You have here the offices of the French Protectorate. Now it is the Ministry of Finance and Economy. At that time, it was there. That was really the heart of French Protectorate. All the offices were there. An enormous demonstration took place in July 1942. Well, some people pretended and still pretend now that the Japanese secret police was behind that, the Kempeitai. In reality, with or without the Kempeitai, the demonstration was what it was. And there was something very important about this demonstration. Before, there were, I would say, upheavals in Cambodia. For instance, in 1916, the famous 1916 events, when many peasants came to Phnom Penh to protest against conscription for the Great War and against taxes. This happened. But They went to the royal palace. They sent their delegates to the king. King Sisowat at that time was to reign from 1904 to 1927. The king promised he would do everything to... so he did nothing. The flag is not there. But they ignored the French. They simply ignored the French. The fact was that the French protectorate in 1916 was not a significant event for them. They wanted to talk to someone. It was the king. In 1942 July, the situation was utterly changed. And precisely the target was at that time the French protectorate authority. And the demonstration took place right there. Interestingly enough, one of the leading person who wasn't there on that day, but was and took refuge in the Japanese embassy was Songok-tan. Songok-tan was a key personality. We have many opportunities to talk about him again, as his name has been linked with Sihanouk's life many times. Songok-tan, was a leading personality. Is the one who founded Nagaravata in 1936. Nagaravata was an absolutely essential newspaper of that. Well, soon after the events of July 1942, Songok-tan disappeared and went to Japan. March 1945 is the famous Japanese coup. After the liberation of France and so on, but the Japanese took the power in Cambodia. And the French were, in most of cases, arrested. Sihanouk at that time abrogated the 1863 treaty, which was the base of the French protectorate, and the June 1884 treaty. That was the second base of the second important treaty of the French protectorate. The one was about establishing relationship. France was to protect Cambodia. And the second one was precisely the treaty which allowed the French to create individual private property on the one side and to abolish slavery on the other side. Now, that was something important, something extremely important. Sihanouk abolished that and de facto declared independence. Interestingly enough, that took place on March 25. May 1945, Songok-tan came back to Phnom Penh from Tokyo. And why did he come back? Because Sihanouk himself asked the Japanese to have Songok-tan to be back in Cambodia. The interesting thing, why? It means that with the American success in the Pacific, Europe, which was already liberated, Songok-tan couldn't have any illusion about the future Japanese victory. The fact he came back was because Sihanouk asked the Japanese to let him back. Interestingly enough, where he said, and some writers like Osborne wrote that it was because Songok-tan was a good friend of Sihanouk's father, Suramarit, and it was the reason why he invited him back. It's absolutely untrue. The reality, was simply that Sihanouk wanted to share the responsibility of the coup. He needed a hard-lining nationalist like Songok-tan who would be able, for instance, to face the French when he was here. It means that if the French had to turn against someone, they wouldn't turn against him, they would turn against Sihanouk. If they wouldn't turn against Sihanouk, they would turn against Songok-tan. It's exactly what happened. This is the new Cambodian flag of a new independent state in 1945. We're used to the three towers of Angkor Wat. Now it's seen from above, from the top. The return of the French, that was on October 1945. From Saigon, General Leclerc came, and the first thing he did was to put personally under arrest in Pochettong Airport Songok-tan. Songok-tan was then exiled in France, and spent a few quiet days in a French provincial town in Nantes, if my memories are good. That was a present from heaven for Sihanouk. Sihanouk just said at that time, when the French reproached him to have proclaimed independence without their consent, he said, and he repeated that to me, "I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose." Didn't do it on purpose. Well, the French offered him a few presents, like, you know, in Bokor, that famous villa, and another one, which is his house, his private house in Khmer, which was the work of Monde, and everything was back to order at that time. Okay. The situation was not brilliant. There were many people and many French high-ranking personalities who wanted the statu quo ante. It means that, well, we are going to do just before 1940, we are back to the French protectorate and so on. That was not possible. Too many events had taken place at that time. First, okay, the French defeat of May-June 1940. Second, okay, the war with Thailand in 1914. End of 1940. Third, the Umbrella Revolt. And fourth, not the least, the coup, the March 1945 coup, when the French were arrested, humiliated, and so on. So for the former colonial power, France, okay, to have all these representatives put in jail, tortured, beaten, okay, in front of the crowd, you can imagine that it was not exactly the best thing to restore France's prestige. Okay? The French and the white people were no more seen, okay, as living God, as having that strong authority. They were seen by people who had proclaimed independence, and Sihanouk himself had made things very clear when he wrote that he was ready to negotiate with the French. Songok-Tan wanted to create a resistance. Sihanouk explained to the French, okay, I'm ready to negotiate, but Cambodia is already an independent state. Well, the independence was little by little translated into a Cambodian independence within l'Union Française, the French Union at that time. It's a very complicated problem, but I want to insist about that. Okay. So, okay, that was the situation. That was the situation in the 40s. The red areas, okay, blots or strokes, okay, were areas under the control of the Viet Minh at that time. You can imagine that the guerrilla really extended over all the south part of Vietnam and Cambodia. Viet Minh and as well the famous Khmer Sara. But the French at that time, okay, had to use a regular army to fight guerrilla warfare, which was certainly not the best way, okay, to be successful. September 1946, okay, very interesting thing. The first election for a consultative assembly. The Democrats got 50 positions over 69. And December 1937, the Democrats got 55 positions over 75. The interesting thing at that time was the independence, Cambodia would get its independence sooner or later. The only problem to know who would get the independence. On the one side, you had Sihanouk, the king. On the other side, you had the Democrat. Okay? And then you have the Viet Minh and the famous Khmer Sara. That was a big problem. Who was going to get the independence, from the French? And the future of Cambodia would depend on it. Okay? Sihanouk was not inactive. In October 1949, okay, Dap Thuon, okay, rallied Sihanouk. Who was Dap Thuon? Dap Thuon was a key personality of these years, and we have opportunities to talk a lot about him. Okay? Dap Thuon was a warlord. Okay? He was a warlord. To say things, I would say clearly, he was originally more a bandit than anything else. But interestingly enough, okay, this is the thesis of Eric Hobsbawm in his book Bandits. Okay? Eric Hobsbawm could show very well that in a colonial context, okay, former bandits, as they have to fight with the colonial forces, were soon perceived as a resistance, an anti-colonial resistance. And so, okay, Dap Thuon was credited with that. But he rallied Sihanouk in October 1949. Sihanouk, okay, in 1952, began talking about his crusade to independence. You can see him in uniform here with his wooden weapon soldiers right there. Two very important events. October 1952, Songok-Tan returned to Cambodia. And who was able to get from the French the liberation of Songok-Tan? Sihanouk himself. Okay? Sihanouk himself, Sihanouk had no illusion about Songkran. He knew very well that Songkran couldn't work with him at all. But he got from the French the return of Songkran to Cambodia. When Songkran arrived at Pochentong Airport, from Pochentong Airport to central Phnom Penh, there were no less than 100,000 people. Sihanouk knew the danger of that. He knew very well. But once again, Sihanouk proved himself to be a superior chess player who is able to produce a master stroke, much before the others. As Songkran got really nothing from Sihanouk apart from a few audiences and things like that, in March 1952, Tan joined the Maquis. Tan joined the Maquis. He went to the countryside in Battambang region, Siem Reap and Battambang, and stayed there. At that time could begin, from February to November 1953, Sihanouk's crusade to independence. What does this mean? It means that Sihanouk played a fantastic game. On the other side, Songkran came back. He got nothing from Sihanouk. So he joined the resistance forces, Khmer, Sara, and the others in the west part of the country. That is simply the following thing. You see, I am the only one against insecurity. This was for the French. I'm the only one against the insecurity. I'm the only one who can master the situation. It's myself or the chaos. This is a master stroke from Sihanouk. Sihanouk then went to Paris. He met Vincent Auriol, the French president. The French president was first not a genius, and the second thing, he was not someone able to take any kind of decision. That was the famous Fourth Republic. The Fourth Republic is a regime in France from 1946 to 1961. It was really the real waltz of government. You have many people who were ministers for 3 days, 1 hour, 2 hours, and so on. You can imagine that the president who, according to the constitution, was already very weak, a president like Vincent Auriol couldn't take any decision. He then went to the United States, where he had interviews with John Foster Dulles. That was another question. Sihanouk bitterly remembered this conversation. And I would say his relationship with the United States began right at that time. Foster Dulles lectured him as a little boy who hadn't understood anything. What he said was the following: well, you know, the French and our enemies are exactly the same. By proclaiming the independence of Cambodia, you would weaken our camp. Better to wait a little more. We are going to, Sihanouk, was right, was entirely right when he said that Foster Dulles was putting the cart, before the horses. For one simple reason, Sihanouk knew at that time, and this is going to be a constant idea, an obsession with him, there is no military solution. At that time, in 1953, everyone knew that there was no military solution in the former French, in what was going to be the former French Indochina. The Sihanouk's opinion would remain the same during the second Indochinese conflict, the second Vietnam War. Then he came back to Cambodia and decided to exile himself to Thailand. Well, he went to Thailand for a very long exile. He only spent 7 days. As he came back to Cambodia, I would spare you the details. The French were ready to negotiate. They negotiated. On October 1953, Cambodia was already independent. The independence was and became official on November 9th, 1953. Before that, it was, I would say, a 50% independence, as Sihanouk stated. A 50% independence because Cambodia was virtually an independent state, but it didn't have its own foreign policy. It didn't have its own monetary policy. It remained within the French Union. At that time, Cambodia was fully independent. The only people who didn't really believe in that were people around Songkran, Khmer Sara, and people in the western part of the country. Soon after Cambodia got independence, from May 1954 to July 1954, the Geneva Conference. Geneva Conference is mainly remembered about Vietnam. But, and this is another reason to admire Sihanouk. Geneva Conference was not only about the consequences of the French defeat of Dien Bien Phu in April 1954, it was about the future of the peninsula. two positions. You had the French and American on the one side, and the British as well. You can see here Pierre Mendès France, and behind him Anthony Eden. But for the Chinese, the Vietnamese, who were the winners in Dien Bien Phu, and the Russian, you had to take into account in the new independent country the zones and the population and the armies who were the dominant forces. It means, for instance, that Vietnam was divided into two parts: the Democratic Republic of Vietnam in the north, communist, and the Republic of Vietnam in the south, pro-American. Laos, okay, was equally, I would say, not officially divided, but you had some rather progressist zones, other conservative and so on. And they wanted to do the same thing in Cambodia. It means that Cambodia would have been an independent country, but would have been cut into two parts, with especially the east part of the country where the Viet Minh, at that time, most of the time Vietnamese, very few Khmer in the former Parti Communist, Indochinese Communist Party, when the Viet Minh were the real military strength. So this population first would have been invited, okay, would have their representative invited to the Geneva Conference, and then a partition of Cambodia could have been contemplated. Sihanouk said no. From the beginning, no. And his two main negotiators, especially Orkneyate Pan, kept daily contact with him. Finally, the Soviet and the Chinese position weakened, okay, and Sihanouk could have his independence recognized, acknowledged, without having the country partitioned. Sihanouk was not happy. He was a king. He was a king, but he was a king in a constitutional, in a parliamentary monarchy, a kind of Cambodian Queen of England, who reigns but could not govern. Can you imagine someone like Sihanouk being present at the unveilings of primary school, having to kiss little children, being offered big bunches of flowers? No, thank you. This was not what Sihanouk was looking for. Sihanouk wanted to govern. Sihanouk didn't want to reign. So what did he do? Because unfortunately for him, according to the Cambodian constitution, the king reigns, the king does not govern. Once more, Sihanouk had a very unusual solution. In 1955, he abdicated. He abdicated in favor of his father, Suramaret, who became the king. And then Sihanouk, as a simple citizen, this is the time his father Suramarit was crowned in 1955, Sihanouk, as a simple citizen, could do what a Cambodian king can't do: politics. The same year, he created his Sangkum Reniyum, translated by Popular Socialist Community, and this regime was to govern Cambodia from 1955 to the coup d'etat of March 18, 1970. 50 essential years to understand modern Cambodia. You see, Suramarit and Sihanouk's mother, Kosama, that was time Sihanouk was crowned. Okay. April 1955, the second real international experience for Sihanouk, the Bandung Conference. The Bandung Conference was a fundamental meeting in Indonesia, in Bandung, where prestigious so-called third world leaders, they were soon talking about non-aligned countries like Nehru, Nasser, for instance. Okay, Sihanouk was there. Well, it was for him, with Hunu here, it was for him the beginning of his famous neutral and non-aligned diplomacy. It is precisely the time where he met the Chinese for the first time, and he was able to create a dialogue with Zhou Enlai, which was going to last for all the coming years. Okay. September 1955, you see that Sihanouk didn't lose time. The Sangkum Reniyum, which was much more a gathering of all the strength of the nation, got 83% okay, of the votes in the general election. Okay. Sihanouk was now at the command of the country. One very important thing about Sihanouk is precisely the fact that he was a real builder. As soon as he launched his regime, Sihanouk transformed his country into a huge building site, building everywhere. You can see him, for instance, here in short pants being present at the beginning of the work of Sihanoukville or Raffinery. Same photograph. Here, a simple road. That was not for Sihanouk town. It was Ang Duong's road from Udong, the former capital, till 1865, to Kampot. Kampot was the Cambodian harbor at that time. It was the Cambodian harbor. And when the French arrived and the French protectorate was established in 1863, the French could easily notice that there was a harbor in Kampot. So, after Phnom Penh became the capital in 1865, the first colonial road to be built in Cambodia was the road from Phnom Penh to Kampot. But the road, due to the fact that the money took a long time to arrive, was only completed in 1919. And after they finished the road, they discovered that they could not build a freshwater harbor in Kampot. All this for nothing. Okay? So what did they do? But the French did one of their biggest political mistakes in Cambodia. They decided, after having tried to build a harbor in Riem, they decided that the entrance and exit door of Cambodia would be Saigon. So they used the Mekong and the Basak. One Cambodian minister at that time said, well, the French had the bad taste to transform their protectorate Cambodia into the colony of the colony Cochin China, Saigon and all that. That was one problem. Okay, you can imagine that even after the independence, Sihanouk was soon fed up to have his Cambodian boats controlled by the Vietnamese police and the custom. He wanted to have his entrance and exit door in Cambodia, and that was the beginning of the adventure of Kampong Saom. There was nothing in Kampong Saom, Sihanoukville, absolutely nothing. Well, they built everything out of nothing. The American and the French financed the harbor, the American the road, and the French the railroad at that time. You see, the building of Sihanoukville harbor. The first views, okay, of that new entrance and exit door of Cambodia, and the oil refinery, which was built a few years later, right there. It was destroyed by a Viet Cong commando on July 22nd, 1970. Sihanouk, okay, really was the initiator of a new vision of power. And to that new vision of power, a new architecture should correspond. Okay. When we look at the power before Sihanouk, okay, we had the first one, that was King Norodom. Okay. The first was to reign from 1860 to 1904. King Norodom was the last king before the protectorate and the last king after the beginning of the protectorate. King Norodom was the only one, according to Sihanouk himself, to have resisted the French. Okay. Although he was the one who signed the protectorate contract, soon when the French tried, okay, to expand, okay, the competencies of the protectorate, Norodom resisted. He had a really sad end in his palace, okay, smoking opium, when he saw that he couldn't do anything, okay, against, I would say, that French bigger and bigger domination. He was succeeded by Sisowat. Sisowat, okay, even in 1984, when the French were at odds with Norodom, Sisowat had already promised the French that it would sign everything the representative of the French protectorate wanted it to sign. And of course, well, that was certainly that kind of honeymoon between France and Cambodia at that time, when Sisowat ascended the throne in 1904. 1906, he was invited to France. Then in 1907, the retrocession of the three provinces, Battambang, Siem Reap, and Serey Sao Poan, the unveiling of the National Museum in 1920, that was a great time, and certainly one of the most glorious times of the French protectorate at that time. In 1927, as Sisowat died, he was replaced by King Monivong. King Monivong, who reigned from 1927 to 1941. King Monivong has really a sad end, okay? As in 1941, the three provinces, okay, were given back to Thailand, to the Siam. This was, okay, the history of the Cambodian kingdom under the French protectorate. Even if we don't consider the details, we have to take what fundamental fact into account. All those kings, apart, okay, from Norodom I at the beginning, they were no more than puppets in the hands of the French protectorate. They had to sign, they had the power to sign the decree the superior residents proposed to them. The power was like that. On the one side, well, you see, but the family, okay, you have Ang Doang right there, okay, and so on, all the royal family with Sihanouk here, Suramarit, Kosamat, Monivong, Norodom, and so what. I want to insist too much about it. The power before Sihanouk was divided geographically in two parts in Phnom Penh. On the one side, you had the superior residence. You don't know this building for the simple reason that it had been destroyed in 1934 to be replaced by a Trocadero-style building, which is now the Council of Development of Cambodia, which was after 1934 the residence, the new superior residence. That was the residence where the real power was. And on the other side, the royal palace, where a king had the only power to sign the decree and to acknowledge the division that was the decision that had been taken by the French. Sihanouk wanted to change everything. For this, a new architecture was a necessity. Van Molivan was to play a tremendous part. Van Molivan, but not only Van Molivan, because there were other architects like Luban Hap, for instance, and the Sankum was really an international experience. You had people like Manning, you had people like Châtel, for instance, and many others. This was the new government complex. That was the new government complex, Chamkamon, okay? You can still, contrary to what I wrote before, you can visit it. Just pretend you want to visit the Senate Library. They will let you inside and you can appreciate this beautiful building, absolutely beautiful building. On the one side, you have the official part, like the State Palace, okay, which was unveiled in 1966 by De Gaulle, while De Gaulle was in Cambodia at that time. Here, another view. Okay, Sihanouk's house there, a simple house. All the buildings are simple, they are not expensive. The State Palace was built with Kompong Cham red sandstone, which is certainly one of the cheapest stone you can find in Cambodia. Sihanouk's house, okay, Bopa Devi's house. This was Changkamon, something beautiful, extremely well done. Here as well, you have one of my favorite buildings here. It was unveiled in 1956, built by Van Molivan. It's the first Van Molivan building with a flat roof. You see it's built on stilts. It was the building of the Council of Ministers. Unfortunately, you won't be able to see this building anymore. It has been replaced by a present the People's Republic of China offered to Cambodia, a disgraceful pyramid which looks like a piling up of rabbits' cages. And as a Cambodian could not refuse a present from Big Brother, they had to discover that this unfortunate building was collapsing by itself and had to be replaced. This was Phnom Penh in 1943. Okay. At the time, the French, well, they didn't build much. The last significant building was the Central Market, which was completed in 1937. This was Phnom Penh in 1970, 1969 exactly, okay, at the end of the Sankum Millennium. Sihanouk, okay, as he defined a new architecture for power, defined a new architecture for education. Education is one of the main achievements of Sihanouk, although it can be criticized. Now, if we consider education, education traditionally took place in the pagoda in Cambodia. The pagoda was the social and the educational center. When you learned, you could learn many things in pagodas. You know, people think that pagoda paintings are boring. They are not. Look at this one, for instance. Very nice, beautiful, sexy young girl with a Buddha, which is in no way disturbed by them. Okay? Sorry. Or this one, you know, that's Siddhartha's marriage. Siddhartha's marriage, and who's the witness? General de Gaulle, right there, you see? Well, it's a kind of anachronism, but we are very used to these anachronisms here in Cambodia. So in the pagodas, you could find many things. But the fact is that pagoda played and still play a considerable part in education. When the French arrived here, of course, well, they were looking at pagodas. It's a protectorate. We're not going to put too much money in education. So better to try to use the pagoda system. So they devised a twofold system. On the one side, you had the pagoda renovating schools. It means that they kept the structure of the pagoda and the pre-existing school, but they added a new curriculum. For instance, geography, modern geography, cartography. That was very important. They put a strong stress on designing maps. Before the French, the first Cambodian maps were Ang Duong's maps. They designed beautiful maps for all over the country, but for the French, those maps had one main defect. They couldn't show an elsewhere of Cambodia. And the French obsession in these early years of the protectorate was to define a clear-cut border, especially with Thailand, where the Cambodian monks had still the bad habits, according to the French, to go. And the second thing was the public French Khmer schools, which was no more, no less, the same system as in France. This is the system and its evolution. Normally, according to the French planification, the pagoda renovating school should have become public French Khmer public school. Look at the results. The result is simple. From 1933 to 1939, from 225 to 908, pagoda, 1818. Attendance plus 500% plus 100%. If you take even someone like Prince Yukanto, which was further exiled by the French, Prince Yukanto said the French want to keep us in ignorance. It was anti-religious education. He wanted something, I would say, much more turned to modernity. The only school which could offer in 1934 a real comprehensive curriculum was the Sisowat Grammar School. Before, the Cambodian had to go to Saigon, to the Chaslou, Laba Grammar School, and so on. Sihanouk was going to change everything. From 1955, from 1953, he began building schools almost everywhere. He literally covered the country with school, primary school, middle school, and it's precisely at this time that the first universities were built. He generally called them my universities. You have here the ITC, Institute of Technology of Cambodia, which was unveiled in 1964. It was financed by the Soviet Corporation, and here, from 1964 to 1975, 100 Soviet professors were to teach and to train 1,000 technicians and engineers a year, what Sihanouk needed for the development of his country. Well, the ITC today, my marvel, I love it, because I had to work in it. Unfortunately, they threw me out to give me a disgraceful air-conditioned classroom, which I've never asked for. Originally, the Teachers Training College, one of the masterpieces of Van Molivan. It was unfortunately unveiled in 1972, 2 years after the coup d'etat, and obviously Van Molivan was not here anymore. He had to leave the country, as he was one of the people who remained faithful to Sihanouk. As it is today, I'm going to go quickly on this, you know that very well. The beautiful library surrounded by water, a real masterpiece. Concrete. I asked once Van Molivan, but why didn't you paint the concrete? And his answer was plain: an architect can't be ashamed of the material he uses. Well, the now French department, this beautiful amphitheater, inside, the big building of the Royal University of Phnom Penh, and so on. If we look at the results of Sihanouk's years in education, 1966 we have this number of students, 1969 number. That's a remarkable progression. This has been strongly criticized. It has been strongly criticized on the fact, that Cambodian education was mainly based in humanities, art, and so on. And many people could write that it was not like David Ayres, for instance, but it was not in phase with the most elementary Cambodian economic requirements. It is only partly true. At that time, in the period that followed the independence for most of Southeast Asian countries, there was a will of a modern imitation, of modern education that would imitate what was done in the Western world. Okay, maybe it was not adapted or entirely adapted to the immediate needs of the country. But on the other side, people were thinking that there soon be a real economic development that would, I would say, create a correspondence between that highly sophisticated education system and the economy of a country. You see the result, Van Molivan, as we're talking about Van Molivan. Van Molivan in 69. Van Molivan was, had been Minister of Education too, and you can see him talking, I am not your sandwich man, see? Okay, and then May the 1st, long life to communism, thinking of, well, Mao Zedong, and so on and so on. What you could find in France in 68, for instance, or in other places right there, okay? There was already a crisis with education. One great achievement of Sihanouk as well, okay, in which it totally transformed Phnom Penh, was the development of the banks of the Bassac River. Okay, you can see when you look at something like that. Okay, when you look at something like that, you know that Cambodia is the only Southeast Asian country to have had this beautiful, modernist and functional architecture. You're not going to find that in Vietnam. You're not going to find that in Thailand, in Burma, or anywhere else. Here, yes. Okay, there on the right. Okay, the famous Olympic City. Well, Luban Hap is behind that. It was unveiled in 1964 for the Southeast Asian Games that were supposed to take place in Cambodia. They never took place in Cambodia due to diplomatic disturbances with Thailand. I think it's very new. Okay? Then, two little marvels, you see, these two ones, two buildings there, now Soviet embassy. The first V-shaped roof, which was going to be very emblematic of Sihanouk's years, built on stilts. Okay? That was originally, it was built by the architect Henri Châtel. It was originally flat accommodation for the personnel of the National Bank. Okay? It's now the Russian embassy after having been the Soviet embassy. And then another marvel, a 600 long meters wide building, which was built originally for the lower middle class. Many historians have expressed serious doubts as to whether one single member of the so-called lower middle class could have ever rented or purchased a flat. Even before the building was unveiled, most of the flat had already been purchased or rented by high-ranking Sihanouk executives for special uses between 5 and 7. Well, another view, okay, of the Bassac. Here, of course, I put the National Bank, the Red Bank, which was a work of Henri Châtel. Okay. Sihanouk wanted to have his own bank. You found always in Sihanouk that idea of breaking with the past. Okay, in terms of modernity, in terms of power, architecture of power. The bank originally was where you have now the Van Restaurant and the Post Office Square. That was the Bank of Indochina. Soon, okay, after the independence, Sihanouk didn't want to hear about that bank. And the bank was near the Naga bridges, you know, the famous Naga Bridge, that beautiful little house which has been replaced now by a horrible blue building. A lady bought it and she destroyed it, you know, that house with a tower. It was precisely there that Sihanouk wanted and Son Sann wanted his national bank to be. And Henri Châtel in the early 60s built this building, which is nowadays the National Bank as well. Well, he built as well the famous Russian embassy, which was accommodation for him. Olympic City. Present state, what do you prefer? You have a choice. The building now, unfortunately, okay, well, as it is now, as it was before. And this little marvel, the masterpiece of Van Molivan, the Suramaric, the Bassac Theatre, a beautiful triangular structure on stilts with a pyramidal conclusion. Shows very well the influence someone like Frank Lloyd Wright's, okay, exerted on Sihanouk. Unfortunately, it was destroyed as it was being restored in 1994, 1993, I can't remember very well. There is a French proverb, le mieux est l'ennemi du bien. The better is the natural enemy of the good. We should have let it like that. And that little marvel, okay, the Chateaumoux Conference Hall, which is still fortunately there. It was unveiled in Van Molivan. It was unveiled in 1961. It should have been unveiled in 1960, but as it was financed by the United States, when the Americans discovered that Cambodians were using North Korean cements, they cancelled everything, they imported their own cements, and the work could resume. Now, okay, all this look very nice and beautiful and quiet panorama of Sihanouk years, but we have to enter into some kind of controversy. We have to enter into some types of controversy because Sihanouk's regime from the beginning had to face a strong, I would say, opposition. One most important affair was the famous Samsari affair in 1956. Not much has been written about this Samsari affair. Samsari was a supporter, is no more Vayeng Sari's father. Samsari was one strong supporter of Sihanouk at the beginning. Samsari, okay, let's say that till 1955 and the early beginning of the Sankum, Samsari supported Sihanouk. After a trip to United States, few meetings right there, and after he became the ambassador to England, there were a series of problems. For instance, he was arrested by the police in London after the complaint of a girl who worked in the embassy and who accused Samsari of having beaten her. Right? That was true, and you know what Samsari said to justify his behavior? In Cambodia, it's normal. Okay, this is exactly what he said. Well, it's a bit shocking, but the fact is that Samsari went back to Phnom Penh. In Phnom Penh, he openly opposed Sihanouk, and he created his own political party. We have documents about that, okay? What disturbed Sihanouk at that time was that there was upheavals in Cambodia, and behind Samsari was obviously, okay, foreign cash. The fact is that Samsari soon after went to Thailand, and he disappeared in Bangkok in 1962. No one knows what happened to him. No one knows what happened to him. Maybe the people who worked with him find that it was a good solution to have him disappear. More important was the famous Dap Chuan affair. Okay. In the Dap Chuan affair, it is perfectly clear that the CIA South Vietnam, you know that after Vietnam was divided into two parts, South Vietnam was, let's call it, the property of the Diem, okay, family, and the regime of Ngo Dinh Diem. On the one side, okay, you had Thailand, okay, you had South Vietnam. And, well, Dap Chuan. Dap Chuan, who was Dap Chuan? Dap Chuan was that kind of warlord, the same one who in 1949 rallied Sihanouk. But in the late 50s, Dap Chuan thought that he was strong enough to consider his Siem Reap region. Sihanouk had left him there because that was good for security, and as Dap Chuan was a ruthless killer, there was no problem. It was one of the most secure places. The only problem is that Dap Chuan used that for his own power and began plotting against Sihanouk. He began plotting against Sihanouk, and there were a few affairs. Sihanouk knew that very well, thanks to, I would say, his own intelligence and the intelligence the French embassy put at his disposal at that time. It was clear that Dap Chuan was plotting with the South Vietnamese and with the Thai and with the CIA, of course. After his close associate was arrested, they made him talk, and he revealed everything about a Japanese CIA employee, the famous Victor Matsui, and so on and so on. There is a huge literature about that. Okay, Sihanouk did not hesitate. Dap Chuan, at the end, was ready to surrender. He wrote to Kosama, Sihanouk's mother, explaining that he would be ready to submit and implored their forgiveness. Sihanouk was not in a mood of forgiving. He sent Lon Nol, and Dap Chuan was killed a few days later. Another important thing was the renunciation to US economic aid in 1963. Why? Okay, the question is not simple. The question is not simple. Well, people wrote extensively about it. We can even refer to the late Son San's memoirs. Well, one fact is that Cambodia renounced to US economic aid in 1963. It was a severe blow, as Cambodian could not find another country who could substitute to the US economic aid. In spite of the French promise, of the Chinese promise, that was no match for the former US aid. It had serious consequences on the behavior of the army, for instance. Well, the severing of the diplomatic relationship with the US in 1965. But why all that? One simple reason. The US had based in their, I would say, second Vietnamese Indo-Chinese conflict, the second Vietnam War, they created an alliance system, the famous SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, which was the Asian version of NATO. And of course, Sihanouk, as the head of a neutral country, had no intention to have his Cambodia to become a member. People can reproach Norodom Sihanouk whatever they like. One thing is sure, when you look at all the pressures Philippines, for instance, at that time, United States and Thailand exerted on Cambodia for Cambodia to become a member of that SEATO, it's really the severing of a diplomatic relationship took place after a very violent article which was published by Time magazine, in which Sihanouk was literally insulted. The only problem is that the article, you had some official data. But something very important, and which was going to change a lot in Cambodia. In September 1966 election, Sihanouk would not and did not take part into the selection of a Sankum candidate. As a result, the right wing could perfectly well buy, I would say, some constituencies. And Sihanouk qualified it as the most, after the election, the most reactionary and corrupt assembly. It was precisely the assembly which was going to vote Sihanouk's destitution. We'll talk about it in a second. De Gaulle visits in 1966. That was something extremely important, as Big Charlie came to Phnom Penh and was ready to support Sihanouk in any way. Unfortunately, not financially, but morally. That was De Gaulle right here. De Gaulle made a huge speech in the Olympic Stadium in which he compared his friend Sihanouk to a modern Saint George of neutrality. An important thing was the Samlot Rebellion in April 1967. Originally, the army was sent to control the perception of rice and the distribution of rice. Well, and there was a few soldiers that were killed by the crowd, and the repression was really strong. At the time, Sihanouk was abroad. And 67, everything was changing. Sihanouk had built a strong relationship with China. It was even his personal diplomatic relationship. He had met Zhou Enlai in 1955 at the Bandung Conference. Zhou Enlai soon invited Sihanouk in China, and the Chinese offered an economic aid to Cambodia without counterpart. 1966, summer 1966, is precisely the turning point in China's modern history, the time of the Cultural Revolution. In 1967, the Chinese began using their embassies, their cultural center all over the world to promote Little Red Book and Maoist ideas here and there. Sihanouk was especially furious about that, and it was a part when the relationship with China was deteriorated. About the relationship with China, much has been written, especially there is a very good thesis about Cambodian-American diplomatic relationship, which was published not long ago. But the fact is that Sihanouk was looking for friends all over the world. Sihanouk's policy was not ideological. Sihanouk's foreign policy was not ideological in the Cold War sense of the term. Sihanouk took friends where he could find them. With a special philosophy, when he compared Cambodia as the ant, in the middle of the elephants fighting. Cambodia and the Cambodian ant had to try to escape from the elephant fighting and to try to persuade the elephant to go and fight somewhere else. Interesting, and of 1967, as the relationship with China were deteriorating, there was the visit of Jacqueline Kennedy in Cambodia, October 1967. And this has been seen as a prelude to restoring links with the US, which was going to happen soon after. Always that remarkable Sihanouk vision of trying to reach a balance. The problem was, of course, here. This is an aerial photograph of the famous Ho Chi Minh Trail. You know the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was a very good communist North Vietnam invention, which was used to carry down south weapons, ammunitions, and trainers. And the fact is that the Ho Chi Minh Trail crossed an important part of the Cambodian territory. The main question remains, could Sihanouk have done anything against that? When we consider afterwards the enormous amount of money the American put in trying to suppress that Ho Chi Minh Trail, bombing and so on, we can doubt, and we can express doubts as to Sihanouk could have done anything about this Ho Chi Minh Trail. That was a fact, and I don't think it can be reproached to him. But of course, that was the existence of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that was going to change everything. Sihanouk was in France in May 1970. In January 1970. In March, he was coming back on a tour back to Cambodia, first Moscow and then Beijing. March 11, 1970. There was a government-sponsored demonstration which ended in the following way. An angry mob sacked the North Vietnamese embassy in Phnom Penh. A few hours later, General Lon Nol, Sihanouk's prime minister, as Sihanouk was still in France, spoke on the radio and gave the communist units based on Cambodia, Viet Cong or North Vietnamese, 3 days to leave Cambodian territory, which was at best ridiculous. It was at best ridiculous. What Sihanouk couldn't have got in 15 years of negotiating, Lon Nol was certainly not to get in 3 days. Worse, March 18th, 1970, in the afternoon, the National Assembly, the one elected in 1966, a few years before, voted the destitution of Norodom Sihanouk. At that time, Sihanouk was precisely leaving Moscow, and Alexei Kosygin informed him of what had happened in Phnom Penh. The new strongman amongst them, Sirit Matak, his cousin, and Lon Nol. Lon Nol was not exactly a genius. He had lived 15 years in the shadow of Sihanouk. He was now the number one, and for Sihanouk, he was now the traitor. Lon Nol, well, was living in his Chamkaman government compound with his fortune tellers. He never took a decision without asking his fortune tellers. One of the greatest ideas he had to protect his capital city against communist troops was to have Phnom Penh surrounded with holy sand. I don't know what you think about the efficiency of holy sand. I may try that in my country house to see if it's good for burglars, but I strongly doubt it can be efficient against AK-47 ballists or B-40 rockets. Lon Nol and that new National Assembly was going to abolish a 2,000 years old monarchy. A new regime was born, short-lived, March April 1970, in fact, April 17th, 1975, the Khmer Republic. Sihanouk, okay, was now in Beijing, the head of an exile government. I would like to conclude by that, although if I have had the time and the possibility, I would have loved to talk a little about the events that followed. We have seen several aspects of what Sihanouk did as a builder, as a man who initiated a new conception of power, as a man who really made his country known all over the world, as a man who really created and was the source of that modern, I would say, new Cambodia, education, and so on and so on and so on. Okay? One thing is certain. Whatever it pleases or not, because Sihanouk has been strongly criticized, one thing, okay, the events talked for themselves. If we compare, and if we ask the old Cambodian people to do the comparison themselves, Sihanouk's regime and these 15 years of Sankumbrianium with what followed between after the coup d'etat of March 18, 1970, these people enrolled students here and there to fight the Viet Minhs. I don't know how many young people were slaughtered when they had to face without weapons and without proper training, well-trained North Vietnamese division. That was the Chen La 2 offensive, for instance. Okay. Then, after that, there was the American bombings from February 1973 to July 1973. Over 200,000 tons of bombs were dropped onto Cambodian territory. The war. Then you had the Democratic Kampuchea, the Khmer Rouge regime, okay, that was not brilliant either. The simple fact that we may compare, okay, that Sihanouk period with what follows, I would say, would act in favor, and much in favor of Norodom Sihanouk. As a conclusion, I would like to finally let Sihanouk speak a little for himself, okay. This is an excerpt from his book, Souvenirs doux et amers. It is true that I have been an authoritarian head of a state, or more exactly, a blend of Sukarno of Indonesia and Nasser in Egypt. But I have never been in the same class as Amin Dada of Uganda or Moses Gema of Equatorial Guinea. Even less their undisputed master of cruelty, Pol Pot of so-called democratic Kampuchea. Never have I been this insignificant and feckless little king depicted by some right-wing French newspapers. Quite simply, I am a man with his good point and his bad. I am neither more or less virtuous than my brother men, created in the world of Genesis in the image of God, but having to assume the inheritance of original sin. I thank you for your attention. I hope I haven't been too long.
About Sihanouk's relationship with Kim Il-sung. It strikes me as a very interesting relationship,
yes,
especially as it was right before the Khmer Rouge takeover and Kim Il-sung.
Well, Sihanouk, I even asked him a question. I even asked him a question several times, okay? And he answered in various ways. Sihanouk met Kim Il-sung, of course, really, after Kim Il-sung told him that he considered Sihanouk to be the only true head of the state in Cambodia. That was after the coup d'etat. Okay? And strangely enough, you know, as it very often happened with these communist dictators, and in Kim Il-sung it was not, it was almost proverbial, since his son, I think grandson, became head of a state. I would say that fascination for monarchy, an incredible fascination for monarchy. Frankly, absolute monarchy was condemned to death. Okay. I would say the French began all that by cutting the head of their kings, Louis XVI, and little by little, so absolute monarchy, absolute hereditary monarchy was something on the decline. It was, thanks to God, saved by a few communist regimes, like North Korea, for instance. Okay? The fact is that Kim Il-sung had a real fascination for all the monarchs all over the world and the court he was trying to do at home. And of course, Sihanouk made movies there. He made several movies in North Korea. For instance, one movie, Who Doesn't Have a Mistress? Okay, most of the people remember painfully, okay, the shooting of a movie because Sihanouk took, and he had no actors there, the whole Cambodian embassy in North Korea, okay, and forced them into playing. Okay, it was a very painful experience. Like, for instance, it was taken to a prince and to the person who was in charge of destroying documents and photocopy. Please, kiss each other better. Not like that. Be more sexy. That was Sihanouk's style. But he spent a lot of time with, I would say, Kim Il-sung and with Kim Jong-il as well. You know, that's a strange part of that relationship. It is true that he was in North Korea, but after, just before the 1993 election, all the people went to meet him in North Korea, you know, to wish him good health and so on. And at that time, Sihanouk, who was there, was still contemplating playing a significant political part. He was not only thinking about being the head of a state, the commander of the army, and on the other side, the person who could enjoy his veto to the nomination of the ministers. No, he wanted them more or less to be back to the former Sankum. And it's precisely there in North Korea, the secret interviews and Norodom Sihanouk and the others made it clear that it was not going to be the case, okay? But it was in North Korea as well. Kim Il-sung, I think, exerted a strong protection as well on him when he was here in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge time, the Khmer Rouge period. But it's true that there was a very strong friendship between the two persons, even stronger than between, I would say, Maoist China and Cambodia. Sihanouk was always very suspicious about Chinese intention over Cambodia due to the fact, of course, that there was a strong Chinese minority here who may be tempted by Maoism. There was not such a thing with Korea.
What I learned from the Cambodian history is that Sihanouk claimed that his political ideologies is not socialism by the Western definition or democracy. He called it Buddhist socialism. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Of course, I skipped the question myself. Okay, about what was his Buddhist socialism? Originally, well, it was something, frankly, which was a bit unclear. Okay, socialism had nothing to do with socialism in Western terms. For instance, Sihanouk, well, had many socialist friends in the international scene and so on. At home, he was strongly anti-communist. This is, okay, the truth. He, I would say, repressed any kind of communist gathering from his point of view. On the other side, okay, he had, you know, he took the idea, in some sense, more or less from U Nu, who was the head of the Burmese state at that time at the Bonn Conference, who was himself talking about Buddhism and socialism as being because Buddhism was a good way to fight the terrible inequalities between men in the country and inequality to the development of the country and to that new Asian capitalism. Okay? In the same time, he took all these ideas from Nehru as well, okay? And he was trying to combine the whole of it. In fact, in practice, we don't know exactly what it meant, practically. There was no official doctrine. That was one of the several points you could have on the Sankum, socialism, Buddhism, neutralism, and so all together. The only time he had a socialist policy, it was after 1963 when he nationalized, okay, most of the companies here and there. And this was, I would say, a kind of economic disaster, according to Son San, at least.
Hello.
Yeah.
I have a question about the historiography, the problems of history of Cambodia. And I'm wondering about the use of declassified material in, say, France, if it exists. For example, going all the way back to 1941, don't we have a very clear idea of what at least the French were thinking at that time about the putting Sihanouk on the throne? And then secondly, are there documents available from the French Deuxième Bureau that are now, tell us what some of the thinking there was? And then finally, I just, a pointer to other people here that are researchers, it's fascinating to look at WikiLeaks cables, Kissinger cables going back to 1973 as they apply to Cambodia. Some interesting stuff there. But tell me what you have found that maybe is available by opening up diplomatic cables in France.
Well, you're perfectly right with the question. The only problem that now, okay, is French have a real obsession of not declassifying documents. Normally, okay, I would say that French intelligence document, you can have a look on them till the First World War. After that, everything is supposed to be secret and entirely secret, if my memories are good, okay? So you can't have access to them. What happened in 1941 is complicated. We don't have many archives, because we have archives of decisions, but the decisions were taken behind doors. For instance, there were some people who were in favor of Monirette, okay? And this as early as people knew, for instance, as to choose someone who was going to succeed Sihanouk, they knew that Monivong was ill, and it had to be soon, okay, or later to be succeeded. The problem was the following one: by whom? Some people were favoring Monivet. They were thinking that that was the true strong man. For the others, Monivet was a bit too strong, okay, and too unilateral. Sihanouk was precisely the man that people could, okay, manipulate easily. It's just like that through, I would say, second hand. We don't have access to the intelligence document, okay, apart from a few of them here and there. So if you know someone who can play, who can play the part of a good WikiLeaks actor for the French intelligence, that would be most welcome.
The floor inside, please take.
Really appreciate for your time and the lecture. It might be a little out of the main theme today, but it has been, I mean, during the political upheaval during the 1960 and 70 that Norodom Sihanouk had to face with many opposition, including the North Vietnam, South Vietnam, Thailand, and the internal opposition parties and movements. Can you clarify like the relationship between Son Ngoc Thanh and Son Ngoc Minh?
Son Ngoc Thanh and Sihanouk.
Son Ngoc Minh and Son Ngoc Thanh.
Well, Son Ngoc Minh's real name, okay, was not Son Ngoc Minh, it was Achamien. Achamien, and I think he was communist, he was Viet Minh, he was a dedicated communist, and he played a significant part, okay, in the genesis of the Viet Minh and the Cambodian communist movement, okay. If he took the name of Son Ngoc, okay, Minh, okay, maybe this could, some people even said that it was the same person at once. It was never the same person. And Son Ngoc Thanh and Son Ngoc, they would have probably killed each other had you put them in a room like that. The fact is that, okay, I think that he took the Son Ngoc, okay, in order to create a relationship with Son Ngoc Thanh. Son Ngoc Thanh was immensely popular. In 1952, in 1945 and in 1952, he was immensely popular. When Sihanouk had the French to free him in 1952, 100,000 persons waited for him. Sihanouk used that. Okay, the fact that he was going, Son Ngoc Thanh, okay, was not in favor of the monarchy, that is sure for now. Okay, he was typically against Sihanouk. He was typically against Sihanouk's, I would say, vision of Cambodia, and of course, he was going to be one important actor of the March 18th, 1970 coup d'état afterwards. That was Son Ngoc Thanh. Son Ngoc Minh quietly disappeared after the Vietnamese entered Cambodia in 1979, January the 7th. Monivong Boulevard was renamed Achamien, but it was the famous Achamien. To very yes, sorry.
Like a short.
Okay, very short. Former King Norodom Sihanouk hurt a lot of people, like politicians in the 1940s and the 1950s. However, he did something good to his admin or his official. But I would like to ask you, or can you just explain what did the former King Norodom Sihanouk do to his officers that make them like want to fight against him, like Mr. Dak Chun or Somsari or even Lonol and Srimata? What did the former king do?
You are talking about very, very different periods, okay? Because Samsari is 56, Dapchuan 58, 59, and the Lonol is after. The fact, okay, is that after Lonol shot Dapchuan, Sihanouk republished in his book My War with the CIA an excerpt in which he just wrote that Lonol was already a traitor in 1958-59, and if he shot Dapchuan, it was because he didn't put Dapchuan to talk and to explain. This is not true, certainly not. The fact is that those are different contexts. But behind HAP, you have the hand, okay, of the CIA, okay, almost all the time, and the necessity to integrate Cambodia inside the Seattle. The fact is that these people, okay, had everything they wanted inside the Sankum. They were privileged and high-ranking privileged people. I can give you another example. You can take Samsari, he had everything. Dapchuan, he was a master in Siem Reap. And after, okay, the revolt, his own revolt, was to break out. He had, I would say, fear, and he proposed to surrender to Queen Kosama. Sihanouk refused, and he was killed at that time. If you take, for instance, someone like Lonol, it's highly complicated. You know, you have that kind of component in Cambodian politics, okay, on which you have, for instance, the famous writer King Mansak, for instance, and a number of higher-ranking people who were viscerally anti-Sihanouk from the beginning. Okay. King Mansak is a very good example. He was going to remain a strong anti-Sihanouk till the end. Okay. Sihanouk was in between, if we talk about ideology, two main components of Cambodian political culture from the Second World War. On the one side, you had, of course, okay, people like John Nat and the new Buddhist idea for Cambodia. On the other side, you had people like former members of Nagaravata and so on. Songoktan was there. King Mansak was not very far. On the one side, you had the idea to identify Cambodian culture with Buddhism. On the other side, okay, that was the theory of King Mansak, okay, as he had a very striking formula. As we were talking together in 1998, and I was trying to do an interview, but it was impossible for him. He said, Cambodia is the lotus, but for Cambodia to be real Cambodia, we have to couple the lotus with a crocodile. Okay, that was his idea. But that was originally a cultural movement and so on. It was soon going to be an opposition movement. Look at what happened exactly when the Khmer Republic was proclaimed. All the people who were at that time, okay, the best enemies of Sihanouk, the official, as you said, you have first a number of the right-wing National Assembly who did not benefit, at least in the last years, of Sihanouk's favors. Then you have generals like Lonol. Lonol hesitated till the end. Okay? He hesitated till the end to take part into the coup d'etat. Then you have the people like, for instance, take Leskosam. Okay, Lekosem, Lekosem is charm name, Lekosem is friend name. Lekosem was precisely one of his soldiers who suffered a lot, like other soldiers, of, I would say, the end of the US economic aid in 1963. So, what did he do? But he was the one who, with parachutist battalion, was quietly selling Chinese and Soviet military equipment to the Viet Cong soldiers who were in the Parrot's Peak area. Paradoxically, Leskosam was the most anti-communist Cambodian general, and he was the one who was in charge of dealing with the Viet Minh. He had creating the Champa Liberation Front under his war name of Ponagar, early, and he was soon going to be a part and be one key person in the creation of a full of a National United Front for oppressed race. Most of the people like that, most of these people, Les Kosheim had already made his fortune under Sihanouk. Let's not talk about Lon Nol. They were absolutely not, I would say, underprivileged. If you took someone like Bilong, well, she was the wife of the former president of the Assembly. He was killed after having been given to the Khmer Rouge by the French embassy in very suspicious relations. And she wrote a book about that. The second part of the book, Mrs. Bilong wrote, I perfectly agree with her, is a result of a long inquiry in which she accuses, I would say, the French official at that time, and she has documents. And not small documents, I would say real documents for that. She's perfectly entitled. But the first part of the book, she describes her life at the time of the Sankum. Their life at the time of the Sankum was not so sad. She said, oh, in France, life is so difficult now. We can't buy whatever we want. When we were in Corsica, we had a new luxury car every year, and so on and so on. When you look at those people before the coup d'etat of March 18, 1970, they were not the poorest, they were not the peasant. I can understand the opposition coming from a peasant of a worker ready to become a member of the Perchitun party or something like that, but the opposition from these people is what I don't really understand. They were thinking of where getting better, I suppose.
So thank you very much.
We have a last one,
question.
sorry.
Okay. This short.
Sorry, just a short question. I would like to ask you to elaborate about the Democrats at the end of the years.
Oh yeah, my God, that's not going to be a short question. That's not good.
How much Democrats were there?
This is a very interesting question. But first, you have the famous prince who died, William Sambor, then Ian Kerr, and so on and so on. In fact, even if in the 1946 election, the Democrat appeared to be the only political party with a substantial platform, the fact is in the Democrat you had several, I would say, trends. You had people who were certainly in favor of, well, what could be called a liberal democracy. Not so many. Many of them were in favor of the abolition of the monarchy. Many of them, were very close to Songok-Tan thesis. And it's not by chance that you will find many former Democrats at the time of the coup d'etat of March 18th, 1970. It's very interesting when you look at the organigrams of the coup d'etat and what follows, and the actors here and there. You had many Democrats who were, I would say, and who would play a part in that. I think that the adjective Democrat in a case like that is much more something very programmatic for the future and so on. I wouldn't go as far as to say that everyone is Democrat, even Democratic Cambodia, if you look at the denomination. There were some people who certainly wanted to implement something which looked like liberal democracy or something like that. But I don't think that democracy was what characterized them. From his point of view, Sihanouk is someone extremely complicated. At the beginning, Sihanouk was not much in favor, I would say, of it. Then he became rather in favor of some kind of liberal democracy with strong power for the king. Sihanouk, had always that very strange oscillation between, on the one side, the necessity to keep alive a monarchy, which was one of the support of Cambodia, one of the main pillars of Cambodian society, and on the other side, But when you look at their programs, it's more a question of individual than anything else. Okay. Ian Koo, for instance, is highly interesting. He published a lot. He published about everything, like Ken Mansak, for instance. He published about law. He published about grammar. He published a book about Khmer language, Khmer. He published here and that, and he published about politics as well. Okay. And you can find a few themes here and there. Most of the time, those texts haven't been translated into French. We have in Khmer, apart from Ken Van Sack thesis, research on a Khmer cultural fund. This was his PhD thesis in Paris in 1952. I've got it somewhere at home, I read it. You have really many documents about that had never been analyzed, okay? Like Ken Van Sack ideas or things like that. Something very funny you will find, and this just a question, you will find all these themes. When you read after the coup d'etat of March 18th, 1970, there was an institute which had been created, the Khmer Mon, the Khmer Mon Institute. No, Khmer Mon, not Mont Khmer, but Khmer Mon Institute. You can even find in Khmer, that's very interesting, all their journal till 1973. Ken Van Sack himself was among the personalities who, I would say, played a leading part into the creation of the Khmer Mon Institute. Soon, Ken Van Sack was fed up, and he said, Khmer Monis, for Lon Nol, it was no more than magic and Buddhism. So Ken Van Sack wanted to leave Cambodia, and he went to work with the UNESCO representation in Paris at that time. But the interesting thing, when you look at this journal, you can find many old Democrat ideas. Okay, the Republic is there, but Republic does not always mean a democracy. I would say, necessity to build a state which is not going to be too intermingled with religion, in that case Buddhism, you find this idea as well, and so on and so on. But democracy, I never had the impression that it was at the core of the Democrats' program.
Again, thank you very much, Dr. Filippi, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. And I am sorry for the inconvenience. And tomorrow we will have a lecture by Van Molivans. And I informed you that some has already been booked, and I apologize again for those who did not see our information, our announcement. And the next day we will have Dave Sokondam, the Dean of International Relations from Zaman University, who will talk about internal politics and foreign affairs of Sungkum Riniyum. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.